the Classic City Sports Podcast.
And McAllister down the left field line. Connor Tate is going to round third. He will score. And rounding third is Blaylock. He will score. And the Dogs walk it off.
If you're looking for the latest Georgia Bulldog news in football, basketball, baseball, and recruiting, then you are in the right place.
It's third down, Bryce Young's career. You need 10, play clock at 4. From the pocket, launching downfield, underthrown and intercepted. Keely Ringo has an escort down the sidelines. All the way to the end zone, and Georgia is going to conquer the Crimson Tide.
Hosted by Jeremiah Stoddard and Jonathan Williams.
Georgia on the mountaintop. Demons be gone, and the drought is over. National champions at long last.
Just sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for these hot takes you're about to listen to.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Classic City Sports Podcast. As always, Jeremiah Stoddard and Jonathan Williams. I know it's been a little while since we've been in here, and hopefully we'll get a little more consistent as we go through the season as well. But there's a lot to talk about because we haven't been in here in a while. We are at the halfway point of the season. Obviously, we have a lot of stuff to talk about at the midseason point. We got Texas coming up next week, and then we have roadmaps set up for what Georgia needs to do to get where they want to go this season. Jonathan, how are we feeling?
Oh, man, I'm doing great. It was a great weekend of college football all around. The October 12th slate officially delivered. It was highly anticipated before the season even started. Like, hey, don't be asking me to do anything on this weekend. Don't be asking me to go anywhere because I'm being on my couch. I'm going to be watching football all day. So that's exactly what I did. Been on the road quite a bit this season, but I had one of the opportunities to stay at home this weekend, and it was a good weekend to be at home and watch some football. So I'm doing great, man. College football this season has absolutely delivered in all facets so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Yesterday was supposed to be the best slate of the entire season, and honestly, it did live up to it. We had multiple games going to overtime. We had South Carolina take Alabama down to the wire. We had a bunch of games that played out the way we wanted them to when we looked at this slate. We had Oregon and Ohio State going down to the wire as well to end our night, and it was just a lot of fun overall. And I think you're right. When you want to look at the overall situation of college football, this season seems like a chaotic type season. This seems like a season that we're going to get to the end of the year. There's going to be a lot of questions of who's who, who's doing what, and we don't really know how the next 6 weeks or 7 weeks of football are going to play out before conference championships. And there's a lot up in the air. And when you look at that and you take Georgia, for instance, in that situation, right? Georgia had their one hiccup against Alabama. They are sitting at 5-1 with the last part of the season being a more difficult part of the season, obviously, with Texas, Ole Miss, Tennessee, all, coming up. And then obviously you mix in Florida, who, battled with Tennessee yesterday. We know they're not a great football team, but we know they're going to step up and play against Florida like they usually do as well. Then you got Tech at the end of the year, so you got a difficult game late in the season with Tech that is not a bad football team anymore. I know they're not a great football team, but they're not a bad football team, so you got to make sure you're ready to play, and that's going to be on a Friday night on Black Friday, so it'll be a different type of environment than we're used to. It'll be a Friday in Athens in between the hedges. It won't be a Saturday for that one. So, but a lot of stuff up in the air and a lot of things to play out. But let's go ahead and talk. We'll get to the future part of it. Let's go ahead and talk about the previous part of the season so far. So right now, Georgia's sitting at 5-1. Like I said, Bama's the one hiccup that you had this season. When you look at the season so far, who is, pick one or two players on the offensive side that, maybe stood out to you and maybe took steps forward that you didn't expect them to take this season.
That I didn't expect them to this season. I think first, I don't know if I didn't expect this one, but I would say that he's definitely delivered in what you wanted him to bring to this football team. I would say Trevor Etienne has been a bright spot. I know that some people, there's some some differing opinions here for some reason. I wrote an article saying that he is exactly what I just mentioned. He's exactly delivered what you wanted him to when you got him out of the portal. There was some backlash from that when I wrote that. So I guess there's some differing opinions. I think what that has to do is that Georgia isn't running the ball at the clip that they usually have in the past. And I feel like people are either accusing that of the coordinator, or they're doing whatever, or they're saying our running backs aren't as good. But what I would say the reasoning is to that is from week 1 to week 5, really until this past weekend, I would say, I mean, teams are loading the box against you. Teams are saying 15 is going to have to beat us. This receiving core is going to have to beat us. We're not going to let Trevor Etienne or any of these running backs beat us. We're not going to let you run the ball. So they're loading the box. But I would say when number one's touching the football, he's making some good things happen. And I would say also he's now getting more involved in the passing game as well, which is something that Georgia needed to look for this year. So I think he's delivered in that aspect. So he would be one that I would say. Then number 2, I don't know if this surprised me, and I know that he's kind of having an up and down season, but who on this offense hasn't so far? I would say Arian Smith, how involved he has been in the offense this year. I mean, out of the gates, this guy has been one of the focal points of this offense. This has been a guy that Carson Beck is targeting on a regular basis, and we see the deep shots. We knew that about Arian Smith's game. We knew that's what he brought to this offense, but I think you've seen more of that. You've kind of seen his role in this offense blossom. I would accredit that to some of losing Ra Thomas at the beginning of the year. I think that kind of created a bit of an avenue for him, but I would also say that Kirby Smart has always said that this is a leader on this offense. People look up to Arian Smith, and people are a believer in Arian Smith. So I know that there's been some up and downs in his game this year, but as I mentioned, you'd have a hard time finding anybody on this offense right now that hasn't had an up and down year. So I would say those 2 guys.
Well, you hit on one that was really big for me, which was Arian Smith. That is my number 1 on the list, and it's because we haven't seen this type of performance from Arian Smith. When I saw Arian Smith the past 3-4 years, whatever, however long he's been there, it's been you put him in there, he runs a deep shot, you hit him or you miss kind of thing, and a lot of times we missed him throughout the years while he's been here. And what he's done this year really surprised me because previous seasons he's had 5-6 catches in the entire year. You know, those low numbers in the entire year. He's become your number 1 target. For yardage, he leads your team in yardage with 413 or 412 yards on the season. And the only player that has more catches than him this season is Dominic Lovett with 28, I think. And I think he has 23 for Arian Smith. So he's only a couple catches behind. Seeing him play that type of role in this offense, knowing the type of weapons Georgia came into the season with, and obviously with Colby Young and Ra Thomas departing the team at this point, so that plays a little bit of a role. But before, Colby left, you already had Arian playing this type of role. So he was immediately implemented into this strategy on offense. And that surprised me because we haven't seen it the entire time he's been there. His ability to just run regular routes, create separation on stuff like that, the screenplays he's gotten involved in, all of that from him has been extremely surprising for me because of how little he was used in prior seasons. So he took some serious steps this offseason, in this fall camp. And obviously the staff and Bobo has recognized it. And honestly, he's sitting over 400 yards through the first 6 games. If you play 15 games, he could get really, really close to that 1,000-yard mark that nobody's gotten to this, since Terrence Edwards. So it would be kind of funny if he's the one player to do it because people would not expect it, nor would they really give him his credit. I think he still gets, crapped on a lot, even though he's done as much as he's done. Some of it's warranted, drop passes on deep plays and stuff like that is definitely a big issue. He busted a route against Alabama that led to a pick. There's been plays where you can criticize some things, but he's also been your consistent receiver, somebody that obviously Carson Beck, appreciates the route running and separation he creates and gets the ball in his hands. So I'm excited to see how that plays out the rest of the season. And my number 2 is Lawson Lucky. I don't think anyone came into the season thinking he was the target for the tight end position. Everybody expected it to be Oscar Delp, and Oscar hasn't quite gotten involved in the passing game the way we expected to this year. Lawson Lucky seems to be the threat in the passing game for Georgia at the tight end position, and I will honestly say he's got so much potential of what he can be in the next couple seasons at Georgia. Obviously he's got this year and next year on his route still to be before he can go somewhere else. But so we get him next year too. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But those 2 players really, really stood out to me because to me, they were players you did not expect to play the role that they are with other people around them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Lawson Lucky is a great suggestion for this. I think that it was very evident to me leaving the Clemson game. I remember asking Brooks, I was like, was this by design that Lawson Lucky is kind of this guy that we're targeting in the passing game more than Oscar Delp? Because to me, I mean, watching how Bobo was calling plays, it was very clear to me that Lawson Lucky was the one getting designed to be running out in space, getting him the yak yards, getting him all of the opportunity in the world to make the big plays. And I know that part of that is due to not only how defenses were playing Georgia early on in the season, shutting down the middle of the field. So that kind of took out Oscar Delp early on. But it's been very refreshing to see a new face in that tight end room to pair alongside Oscar Delp, and one that's playing well. I mean, he's had a big day a few times this season. And it looks like Oscar Delp is kind of finding his way again after the Auburn game. He had a few nice catches in that game. So if you can get number 4 and number 7 rolling this year, I mean, your tight end room is looking really, really good. I think that I know I've seen people say that there's been a major drop off in the tight end room. Well, no, duh, guys. I mean, you just had the greatest tight end in college football history leave your program. So I don't care who you have running routes or blocking or anything like that after Brock Bowers. You're going to have some type of drop off, and it's probably going to be a steep one because no one's going to play as well as Brock Bowers did the last 3 years. So I think that Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky both are playing well, but Lawson Lucky has certainly stepped up in this offense.
He definitely has. And when you say like a drop off, I mean, like you said, of course, you had Brock Bowers. He's a generational talent. He is the best tight end to ever play college football, arguably. And he's also in the NFL as a rookie. And he's sitting there basically leading all tight ends in catches and yards and making ridiculous plays against the next level of competition in the NFL. And so if you've got a guy like that leaves, of course there's a drop off. You cannot expect Oscar Delp to come in and take that role and be that productive, nor for Lawson Lucky as well. But like you said, when you balance the two, it reminds me a lot of, at a different rate, obviously. It's not going to be the same thing as, having, Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers. But you have that type of players between the two of them. You have, Lawson Lucky, who has shown he can get out there and make plays in the passing game, kind of like Brock Bowers in that sense. Not at the same rate, but he can get out there and make a lot of plays, create separation, and that's where they seem to design it. And you got Oscar Delp, who's going to be, your end-of-line blocker and create that part of the game for your tight end room, and then also slip out and make some catches, kind of like Darnell Washington in that point. And which is, it's crazy to think that that's the type of role that Delp has played this season, because in high school, he never put his fingers in the dirt. He didn't stand in a three-point stance at all in high school. But now you have Todd Hartley coming out here talking about he's the most, talented blocker at tight end position, natural blocker at tight end position that he's ever had. And he's had plenty of talent at that role. So it's really interesting to see how that plays out. And I'm excited to see what this offense can do. And before we switch over, I know you talked about, ETN and in the run game and what he's been able to do. Obviously, I think he's right around 400 yards, just under 400 yards so far this season, which, is where you kind of need him to be. And then he started to get a lot better out of the backfield in the passing game, which is important as well. What Georgia fans need to understand is the run game may not be working as much so far, and that's because the boxes are loaded and it makes it really difficult. What Georgia has been doing, and with Mike Bobo, is they throw those screenplays that everybody hates. You got to stop looking those as pass plays and those being that type of situation where you're trying to, get 15, 20 yards off of it. It is Georgia trying to run the ball, an extension of the run game, by throwing those screenplays and creating that, 5 yards of reception off of that. They're not trying to sit there and break away all the time. If one does, they're extremely happy with it. But their goal with those plays is to open up that box a little bit, spread those linebackers out, and create that short yardage run game, essentially, in that aspect of it. And I don't think Georgia fans really understand that with what Bobo's game plan has been so far. It is not just, you might get tired of watching it as a Georgia fan, but they're averaging around 5 yards a reception on those screenplays. That is part of your run game. This past weekend against Mississippi State, Georgia threw the ball more than we've probably seen Georgia throw the ball, in a long time. I think Carson Beck had, upper 40 attempts, like somewhere around 48 attempts. I'd have to go back and look to see for sure, but he is throwing the crap out of the ball. But part of it is because he's helping in the run game by throwing those screenplays and letting guys like Arian Smith get out in the open and make those explosive plays off of it.
Yeah, I know that screenplays get criticized a good bit, and it probably does feel like that Georgia runs a lot of them. But I think the thing about screenplays that, one, people have to remember, and what you have to understand about screenplays is getting 5 yards out of a screenplay, that's a good play. Getting 5 yards on any play, I mean, you would consider that a win offensively. And I think, too, that when screens don't work, when they get blown up or something happens, one is very noticeable. You can typically pick out who missed their block or who got blown off of their block or who didn't make their play. It's very easy to figure those things out in a screenplay because you're out in wide open space. Everybody can see you. And two, it just looks bad because if it's going to get blown up, then it's going to be for no yards. And it's like, oh, these short throws, we're not getting any yards, and we just keep running them. So, I mean, it's easy to scrutinize screenplays. And I understand that they do run a lot of them, but you also have to know that you can't chug it deep 50 yards every single time. And I think that the way Georgia runs them, and I think that we've kind of figured out over the years, and you can do this with majority of offensive plays. It's kind of why offense is so hard to be consistently successful, is that you need all 11 guys to do their job on every single play. Is there's been multiple times where you circle one player and you say, well, if he seals his block or if he holds his block for one more second, then we're running in space for the next 50 yards. You might even turn it into an explosive or a touchdown. So it's just very hit or miss. And I think that it is part of the run game. It is an extension of the run game, but it's also just kind of part of football nowadays. You go find me a team right now at the NFL level, the high school level, or the college level who's not throwing 5 screens a game or something around that number.
Yeah, the screen is definitely a part of it, and let's talk about Bobo real quick too, because I know you and I've been real vocal in a chat with a few friends and stuff like that as well. And then you take stuff to Twitter and you show people the stat line of things, and you kind of show like what he's done at Georgia since he's been here. Let's take away the part what he did before Georgia, like before he left to go to Colorado State, before he was everywhere else, right? Let's look at just what he's done since he's been back. And last year was obviously a very productive year, and Georgia just came up short because of Alabama in the SEC championship game. You lose one game and your season's over last year. We kind of knew that was the case. It is what it is. You can't be perfect all the time. And this year, your one hiccup is Alabama again in the regular season. Mike Bobo is averaging 36.8 or somewhere around that range of points per game so far this season. And that's on an offense that everybody can sit there and look and say, we have so many drop passes. We have so many missed blocks. We have so many just busted assignments throughout the time. And you go back and look at that Alabama game and you say, hey, Georgia was down 28-0 because your quarterback was turning the ball over. Wide receivers were dropping passes. You had guys busting routes that turn into turnovers. And you still ended up coming back and taking a fourth quarter lead and scoring 30-plus points against Alabama on the road in that game. My thing about Georgia and Mike Bobo is he's calling a lot of good plays in certain situations, and it's not that he's not good at his job. I think everybody wants to sit here and compare him to Todd Monken and say he's not Todd Monken. Well, no, he's not Todd Monken. Todd Monken, to me, was an elite offensive coordinator, but he even had his moments that weren't great at his time at Georgia. In certain games, he lost to Bama because he decided to play a little bit different in that game, or maybe things weren't clicking right in that game against Alabama. Mike Bobo is doing what he can with the team that he has this year, and I think people aren't expecting the drop-off we had by losing Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers and things like that, but Mike Bobo is doing what he needs to do to win in this league. And even when your team is, failing to execute in certain situations, Mike Bobo is still putting you in a position to score. And like this past weekend, everyone wanted to criticize him. He still scored 41 points this week. But what people aren't talking about is your defensive side of the football and your deep balls, your busted coverages and your things like that people are that Georgia's giving up a lot more points this season than we would all expect as well. So I think a lot of the flack for the way Georgia's season has gone so far goes to Mike Bobo because that's the popular answer. But I don't think he's the problem at Georgia this season.
No, I mean, I wouldn't say he's a problem at all. I've given plenty of my piece on Mike Bobo, whether it be Twitter or on our show during the week. I mean, I have said my piece. I have defended that man. I definitely don't think he's a problem. And I always say this too, like, is he a perfect play caller? No, but there is no perfect play caller. And two, if you want to get rid of Mike Bobo, who are you bringing on? Name me a candidate right now that you're just going to be able to say, all right, Mike Bobo, you're done. We're going after this guy. We know for a fact we can go hire this guy. Buster Faulkner, that's the one that everybody would say. I would think, well, Buster Faulkner is probably on the verge of maybe getting thrown out into the realm of head coaching jobs now, even after 2 years at Georgia Tech. I mean, that is one hot name on the market right now. And I think that he would have been in line to get a job at Georgia if he had stuck around just a little bit longer. But I think that ship has sailed. For me personally, I would say that You would look at the guy that's in the box with Mike Bobo right now, which is Todd Hartley. He's been the one that's sitting up there with him the past couple of years. But,
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real. There's not these genius offensive coordinators just growing on trees. Steve Sarkisians don't pop up every single year. I mean, Chip Kelly's, that happens every once in a while, but there's not a Chip Kelly out there that you can hire every single year. So, I mean, even if you did want to get rid of Mike Bobo, I wouldn't say that there's just this stamped candidate right now that everybody knows is the real deal, that he can get the job done at a higher rate than Mike Bobo does. So the way I look at it is you got a really good coordinator in Mike Bobo. You got a guy that is averaging, I don't know, maybe around 37 points over his career at the University of Georgia, I would say. That's good enough to win you football games. So, I mean, he's putting you in positions to win. He's putting his players in good positions. That's all you can really ask of the guy.
It is. And when you even bring up like a situation like Chip Kelly, to me, that's like a one-off situation. The guy was a head coach at a, division, or a Division I Power 4 conference team, and he decides to go take an offensive coordinator role. But you also have to realize he also had a history with Ryan Day before he takes that position. He coached with them multiple times. He was the head coach where Ryan Day was on the roster with them, the coaching staff at different times. So they have a relationship, and so that works out like that because of previous history. You can't just go pick one of the great offensive minds from being a head coach some other place just because you want to. Like, that doesn't always work out in that aspect of it to be able to do that. And I don't think people understand that that's just the situation. And when you talk about Georgia and having Mike Bobo over the past couple of seasons, and you want to compare him to Todd Monken, but what I want people to really look back at and go and look at who was there when Kirby took over to before Monken got there. I mean, you had Brian Schottenheimer, you had James Coley, Jim Chaney, who I think was there. Those three guys beforehand were so bad. If you can actually say those guys were really not good, to the point where James Coley was only there for one season. He left, went to Miami, and now he's back as a wide receiver coach, and he's doing a really good job as a wide receiver coach. He was not an offensive coordinator. So when you talk about Mike Bobo and say he needs to go, who's going to go? Who's going to come in before, like next? You're not going to go find your Todd Monken immediately. That was a big play by Kirby Smart when he was able to get him, and we were lucky to keep him as long as we had him before he eventually went back to the NFL where he wants to be. Mm-hmm. What I want Georgia fans to understand is the grass is not always greener, and the grass was not green before it was Todd Monken, Mike Bobo. It was really, really rough for a couple of years there, and it was not fun on that side of the ball. But now you got Bobo, and I think he's capable of scoring you, like I said, 36 and a half points so far this season, and he's got, trending upward on that aspect where he's starting to put some performances together. In the last 3 games, Carson Beck has thrown for, an average of probably 350 yards between, one game against Auburn where he threw for 250 plus, 430 against Alabama, 450 against Mississippi State. Like, he's on track at this point. Like, the offense is rolling in different ways. And it'll be interesting to see this coming weekend when they play against Texas, what they're able to do in that part. And that'll be the real test of, what have you come in to do? You can't go out there and play like you did against Alabama, but we'll get into Texas in a second. I know we kind of went down the offensive side for Georgia for a while. Let's flip over to the defensive side for Georgia and have that same question we had a minute ago. Is there anybody that stands out on the defensive side of the football that maybe you didn't expect this season?
I'm going to say this guy. I expected this one, though. I think he was one of my preseason candidates as one of these breakout players, but I'm going to say him anyways because he deserves his flowers. Tyrone Ingram-Dawkins. I think he's been the biggest factor on the defensive line outside of what Nazir Stackhouse and Christian Miller have had to do pre-Mississippi State. I thought Xavier McLeod played really well for Georgia on Saturday, but it's been Stackhouse and it's been Christian Miller in the interior of that defensive line because Jordan Hall has not been available to go. And Xavier McLeod has been banged up this season as well. So those two guys have really held it down. But Tyrone Ingram-Dawkins has been the most disruptive football player consistently down in, down out on this football team for the last 6 weeks. I mean, that guy has been incredible. He was top 10 last week coming into this game in sacks and tackles for loss, something that Georgia fans have been crying for. I mean, I should say crying, but something that they've been hoping for. One of these defensive linemen would be putting up national numbers, and TID is absolutely doing that. So he deserves to be on this list. Then I'm going to go with Dan Jackson. Dan Jackson has played, I would say, out of anybody on this football team, if you were to ask me who is the one player who has consistently played good football for the last 6 games, it's Dan Jackson on both sides of the football, I would say. I think Dan Jackson has been one of the best football players on this team all year long. He's been in the right spots, and that's just kind of his career. But I would say this year especially has kind of shown up because he's not missing tackles. Dan Jackson's not out of spot. Dan Jackson is doing his job every single Saturday, and I think people are starting to recognize that, like, oh, Dan Jackson's not just this walk-on guy that we had to play because we didn't have depth. Dan Jackson is a legitimate football player, a guy that is now being associated with Sundays, playing on the NFL in the coming years, which he has the measurables and everything to do that. And the way he plays football, like he doesn't care about himself. He just cares about his team. He's going to play on Sundays because of that.
He definitely is, and actually, it's kind of funny that that's what you say again, because just like the offensive side, your second one is my first one, because Dan Jackson, I don't think anyone expected him to continuously keep a starting role, right, this entire season, because in the offseason, all of the talk was, hey, KJ Bolden's really good. KJ Bolden's going to get on the field early. KJ Bolden's going to probably take that starting spot at safety. Well, KJ Bolden has been on the field. KJ Bolden is a starter. But Dan Jackson was as good as he is this season that it created a dilemma for Georgia in a situation they had to figure out. Guess what? KJ Bolden is on the field. Dan Jackson's on the field. Malachi Stark's on the field at the same time. They bumped him down to star because of how good Dan Jackson was playing at safety still, and they could not get him off the field. He is too good to take off the field. KJ Bolden, too good to not be on the field. So what do? Obviously, Malachi Starks is there, so they move him to star, and he's playing a lot of that. And I know Jonel Aguero is on the field a lot at star now that he's healthy, and he's been out there a lot the past couple of weeks. But they're creating situations where they can keep Dan Jackson on the field at all times because the guy, like you said, has been extremely consistent. He's put his work in year after year after year. After Starks came in a couple years ago, stole his job immediately. You kind of thought that's what was going to happen again with KJ Bolden. And this time it happened in the sense that KJ had to be on the field, but they kept Dan Jackson on the field, and he has been so incredibly talented, and he's all over the field. He's making tackles behind the line of scrimmage. He's picking the ball off. He's breaking up a lot of passes. He's just involved in a lot of – anytime you see the ball, thrown downfield, you're going to see number 17 somewhere in the general area, if not making the play himself. And that blew me away because I know, he was a former walk-on, got a scholarship, and he's been playing – he has the best walk-on story that you've seen where he just enrolled to the school and literally basically called Kirby Smart and said, hey, I want to play football. He didn't get recruited or anything like that. He just went there, and now he's playing football, and now he's a starter, and now he's going to be a Sunday guy. He's going to be on the field on Sundays. He's going to get drafted because he is consistent. He's fast. He's got good reads. He's where he's supposed to be. I haven't seen a single play all season where he busted a coverage. We can say we've seen Starks bust coverages. We've seen, Jonel Aguero bust coverages. We've seen KJ Bolden bust coverages or be in the wrong spots. We have not seen that from Dan Jackson the entire season. Like you said, he has been the most consistent player on this entire roster, not even just the defense. So it was, like I said, it's kind of funny that's your second guy because once again, that's my first guy on the list. And my second guy is going to be Jalen Walker. And the reason it's Jalen Walker is not because I didn't think he was talented. My reason for him is because I didn't see his role and what he was going to be able to play on this defense. And then all of a sudden, Michael's got some injuries and stuff. He's playing a lot against Clemson in the first place. And then you see Michael go down and he plays that role. Jalen is the reason you win that game against Kentucky. You sweat that game out and win by 1 point.
A single stat.
He didn't log the stats, but that is the reason you win that game. He's in the backfield and absolutely just wearing Brock out the entire game. If you don't have him playing the role he did in that game, you don't win. And then now you've got 2 losses on the season instead of 1.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Jalen Walker, another one of those players that has really stepped up for Georgia this season. And, we've been talking about the secondary a lot, so I think it's a good time to point this out there's been so many questions of why are we missing tackles? Why is our secondary out of position so much? This, that. If people want to point fingers at players, people want to say this player sucks, which I think is always the wrong take. I don't think there's any room for anybody to say that a Georgia player ever sucks. I just think that that's so egregious. I think that's so ignorant. And I think that's very ignorant as fans to start pointing fingers like that. But what I think you can point fingers at is saying, well, you lost Kamari Lassiter, who Kirby Smart himself said is the best tackler on this football team. When he was at the University of Georgia, that's who Kirby Smart would say is our best tackler. You lost Javon Bullard. That's another guy that was known to make a tackle, always be in the right spot,
Yeah.
a known leader on this football team. And you lost Tyke Smith. Anybody remember a time last year when Tyke Smith was in the wrong spot or didn't make a tackle when he needed to? So basically, your team's best 3 tacklers last year got removed out of your secondary, and now you're basically playing with an entire unit that doesn't have either of those guys. All 3 of those guys, by the way, are starting for NFL organizations. So NFL caliber football players got plucked from your secondary because they were that dang good. There's going to be a drop-off. You got a freshman playing safety right now. You got Jonel Aguero playing star right now. When he was hurt last year, he didn't get many reps at star last year, but he's played well, I would say. And then you got Dalen Everett, and you also have Julian Humphrey. Julian Humphrey played a little bit last year, but he didn't have a full season of starting under him. So there's reason for there to be some issues in the secondary. Now, blowing assignments and whatnot, that's never been kind of Georgia's thing, but I would also say that maybe that's just something that continues to get fixed. I know you're at the midseason point, but the goal has always been you want to be playing your best football down this stretch of the season, and that's what's going to have to happen. You can't have it happen on Saturday, but I would say don't start pointing fingers at these players. Point fingers at the fact that you had such a good secondary last year that's the reason why it maybe doesn't look as good as it did last year.
It definitely is. And it's funny you talk about Tyke. Did you see the type of day that he had today?
Yeah, forced fumble, interception, like 8 tackles.
Yeah, forced fumble, interception, 6 to 8 tackles, somewhere in that range, and 2 pass breakups. The dude you lose a guy like that, you got to, Javon Bullard is starting for Green Bay. Kamari Lassiter starting for Houston. These guys they're not just NFL players. They are starters as rookies in the NFL. It kind of goes back to the same conversation we just had about tight ends. Brock Bowers is a starter in the NFL. Ladd McConkey is a starter in the NFL, and they're both collectively doing very well, not just starting, but they're scoring touchdowns, week in and week out. They're making crazy plays. These guys you got to expect that there's going to be some drop off at some point. You can't expect, I know Georgia fans have gotten really accustomed over the past 4 years, probably, that, when you set a draft record the very next year, guess what? You do it again because the next guys up are, just as good, if not even better. When you look at like a Jordan Davis to Jalen Carter kind of situation where things play out like that, right? It's not this case every single season. You have to expect that to kind of go down a little bit. But what you just said a second ago, busted coverages, guess what? That can be fixed. That is that is a issue. Now, those type of mistakes are something that like your coaching staff can look at and say, hey, what did you see here? All right, well, that's not what we want to do. This is what we want to do. We want to be in this position because that's where I've told you to be. This is what I want you to do in this situation next time. You can learn from that and grow from that. Those busted coverages can be fixed as the season goes on. Now, next week creates a big challenge because you got Quinn Ewers in Texas and Isaiah Bond and their entire offensive weapons that they have at Texas. So this is the week to get right? You had this week against Mississippi State, and going into the week, they ran the ball like crazy. But all of a sudden, they're throwing the ball on you because they saw something. Georgia's got to adjust now going into this next week against Texas in a game that's, honestly, it's a must-win for Georgia at this point. You drop to Alabama, you cannot lose your first 2 games of the season that are considered your challenging games. Up to this point, you've only had 1. So going into the Texas game, it becomes a must-win for Georgia, in my opinion. And how do you think Georgia's going to respond on the defensive side against Texas?
Well, I don't know how they're going to respond. I don't want to speak for anybody, but what I would hope is that, this is as big of a week of any of making sure that your eye discipline is in check. And eye discipline is part of the reason why I think you've had some of these busted coverages. It's all motion and eye candy and everything with Steve Sarkisian's offense, and they're playing really good football. They're not missing too many other opportunities. So you're going to have to be in the right spots all day Saturday if you want to at least hinder this offense a little bit to maybe help your offense out a little bit and let them capture some moments. So it's a massive weekend for the defense. You're going to have to play. It's the time where Georgia's going to have to play a 4-quarter game complete. And I know that's kind of crazy to say that. Well, they didn't play a complete game against Alabama and they dang near won that football game. That's true. But I think that this time you almost have to, just because of what they do offensively and just like how your offense has played this year. Like, you would like to see your offense have a complete game matched up with a complete game from your defense, because that's been the thing this entire season of, hey, the offense played great today, defense not so much. Hey, Defense played really great today. Offense kind of struggled a little bit. I think the only complete game, and even then the offense had a slow start, but it was game one, so nobody wanted to really discuss it too much, was against Clemson. That's been your most complete game all season long, and Mississippi State was looking like that until they started closing in the lead on you, and all of a sudden it's a 10-point football game. But I would also credit that to pass interference on third down, face mask on third down, roughing the passer on third down, a touchdown run by Etienne getting called back due to holding. I mean, you had some badly timed penalties on Saturday, and that allowed Mississippi State to get back in the football game and sustain drives. So I think that they were close. They were close to doing it on Saturday. Just these small moments, these small pockets of games where Georgia does get in the wrong spot and teams are capitalizing off of it, and they're punching them in the mouth. So definitely just going to have to get that in check defensively. You got the players to do it. You got the staff to do it. I think that's the biggest piece of confidence you can walk into with this weekend.
Yeah, when you look at this past weekend, like even Kirby Smart himself said it, we spotted them 14 points off of penalties. So you take those 14 points away and that game looks very different. And because those penalties came on third down and extended the drive, that's where it really, really hurts you like that. So when you go into a game like Texas, not only do you need to be just solid all around, you cannot shoot yourself in the foot with those penalties and those situations where you extend drives for the opponent, because they're going to be able to do it plenty on their own. They don't need your help doing it like that. And when you extend those drives for them, they're going to score. Almost always they score points on those drives, it feels like. And you can't do that against an opponent like Texas. What I will say is you go back to look at what they just did against Oklahoma, and I don't think Texas is a team that's out here just burning the doors off offensively against decent opponents. They scored 35 against Michigan. They scored around the same against Oklahoma. So they're not going up here putting 50 points up against these guys. I mean, even Quinn Ewers only had 199 yards on Saturday against Oklahoma. So he wasn't out there just, shredding the defense in different ways, but they had that. They had a good run game, and they were able to have a complete offensive performance to go over 400 yards of total offense and win that game handedly by over 30 points because Oklahoma was not able to score anything on them. And yeah, Oklahoma's offense isn't great, but Texas defense played very well in that football game as well. So offensively, Georgia needs to go out there, in my opinion, and just be confident, right? I think when you've seen Georgia come out there and show confidence in Carson Beck, and let them start stretching the field a little bit. And while I agree that those screenplays, I look at them as a run play. I don't look at them as just being, screenplays constant throughout the game. I look at it as being an extension of your run game. I want to see Georgia lining up those 10, 15-yard pass plays. I don't need them going out for 50-yard shots all the time, but I want to see them looking past the sticks and letting Carson he loves that dig route. Seems to work pretty well to Arian, to Dominic Lovett, whoever, Dylan Bell. They get separation there. The scheme itself draws that player open. I want to see some of that drawn up on Saturday and let Carson rip it. I think we talked about this the other day, or actually I might have been talking to somebody else. When you go back and look at Saturday's game and how Carson played, he threw 2 interceptions, right? Number 1 interceptions off the helmet of a defender, bounced straight up in the air, and it is what it is. That, maybe he could have done something by not hitting the defender in the helmet when he's jumping for the ball. But other than that, it's not on him, right? The ball just goes 30 yards in the air. Of course, somebody's going to come down with it. And unfortunately, it's the defense that comes down with it. The second interception, originally I had said I was okay with it because it looked like Carson's just trying to make something happen. He's just throwing the ball into a tight window and he's trying to make a play. And that's something we haven't seen from Carson a lot over his career. He's a pretty safe player, but him being willing to just try to attack and make a play look good. And then somebody else pointed out to me that I guess Carson talked about it in a post game and said, the defender, pulled on the wide receiver, jumped in front of him because of that. And even the wide receiver turned around and was looking for a flag afterwards. When you watch the broadcast, they never show you anything other than when the ball is getting there on any replay. I'll be excited to see when Brooks has the all 22 and can actually look at that play and see how that played out. But that's what Carson said himself too. And so when you take stuff like that away and you don't get a flag on something like that, Carson did not have a bad game. Then he throws for 459 yards, which is a career high for him. And he's now 2 out of 3 games of throwing for over 400 yards. Let them go out there and be confident. Let Carson go out there and just pick apart the defense. Because if you're like me, I watched that first half of that game and I was completely blown away when I saw that he threw for 317 yards because it didn't feel like it. It didn't look like it, but he did in the first half of that football game.
Yeah, Carson is definitely one of those players of everything comes so easy. Like when he's on, it looks so easy that in your mind, you're not really cognizant of what exactly he's piling up in the stat sheet. I had the same reaction. They had it on the broadcast at halftime. They said Carson Beck with 317 yards, and I think he already had 2 touchdowns. I was like, 317? And I think at that point, they had thrown the ball 34 times in the first half.
He was
I was like,
slinging
good
it.
God. I mean, they're letting 15 slinging out there. I texted Brooks and Christian. I said, dang, Bobo must have taken those Carson Beck Heisman odds are dead take from Brooks personally, because they said, to hell with that. We're going to let this guy sling it today. So it was definitely a great day with him. And, and I think the only way you walk away from that offensive performance from Georgia in general and from Carson Beck and you say, they didn't look that good, is if you're just kind of staring down the stat sheet and you are looking at, Trevor Etienne only had 48 yards or whatever he finished with today, and Carson Beck threw 2 interceptions. Like, I think that's the only way you could ever possibly walk away with that game and say, offense and Carson Beck and Mike Bobo, they weren't really on today. I would say they played really well. And even despite some maybe moments where they didn't look great, they always kind of found the right time to force the ball down the field or anything like that. So I think that the offense is walking into this week with a lot of confidence, as you should be. And I said this before the Mississippi State game, like, this should be the game where you walk away from and you're like, all right, we got everything going now. Offense just had a great day. Defense just had a great day. Unfortunately, it's just the offense walking away from that game saying, all right, I think we feel good. I think we're in a good spot now. But defense, I think it was just one of those days. And it happens. I said it. I mean, the explosives that happened in the secondary, one of them happens because one of your players isn't in the right spot. Another one happens because it's a goal line situation. No one covers it back. The other 2, the late game touchdown, and then the one down the left field sideline, that was one. The first one was a perfect throw by the quarterback. I don't know what else you're supposed to do as a defensive back. And the second one, I wouldn't even say it was a great throw more than it was just a great catch. I mean, the dude just laid out for it, made a great play, got possession of it, and, it ends up being a 10-point win for you instead of it being a 17-point win. So I'm definitely some issues, definitely things you got to get cleaned up. But like you mentioned, they're fixable. You can manage those.
It is, and I will say the one thing I do have a concern about defensively going into this game against Texas, as you said earlier, it's a game where your eye discipline has to be there, right? And I've heard Brooks say this all season long. Georgia loses, games against just good opponents, good players, things like that. They do not lose against schemes, right? Well, when you got a game coming up against Sarkisian where the scheme is going to be really good, and your team has showed you in this season that the eye discipline has struggled, it's one of those things where I look at and say that the scheme could get you if your eye discipline doesn't get fixed, right? In this game, that's where I do have a concern at this point, because I do think that their scheme is going to be really good. And if that eye discipline has not been fixed, if it doesn't get corrected this coming week against Texas, they're going to have, multiple plays that end up being big hitters and get down the field and end up scoring points. And when it's a game against Texas and it's not a game against Mississippi State anymore, those big plays go from, hey, instead of us winning by, 17 or 20 plus, all of a sudden we win by 10. It goes to hey, instead of winning by 4, now we lost by 3 because we let up this huge play, kind of like what happened against Alabama, where you get down the field and, Ryan Williams does what Ryan Williams does, and all of a sudden they score 12 seconds after you take the lead. That's the kind of thing that does concern me. However, I do think that Georgia offensively going into this Texas game, I think they found a really good groove. I think they'll be able to score points. I think they'll be able to be in that mid-30 range on the offensive side, and you just need your defense to make a few plays here and there to kind of keep you in it.
Yeah, and I think everybody knew before coming into this football game that, even in the preseason, that Georgia was going to have to play a really good game to beat Texas. You knew that playing against Alabama, and you know that about Texas. So I would say nothing has changed. I still have the same questions about Texas that I've had about them since the beginning of the season. I think their secondary is gettable. I don't think it's one of their strengths. I don't think the defense is all that elite, but the offense is good. And I knew that the offense was going to be good. But I do still have some questions of, I don't think that they have a Xavier Worthy or a A.D. Mitchell on this offense, but Quinn Ewers is playing the best football he's played of his entire career when he's healthy. And I think that's been the difference for them. And he's playing really consistent. Arch Manning played really good ball for them when he had to step in and be the starter. So the offense is the offense. The defense is still the defense, in my opinion. Got to play a good game on Saturday. If you do, I think you come out with a win.
Yeah, absolutely. You just got to play. You can't go out there and just bust coverages. You can't go out there and just make boneheaded mistakes, run the wrong routes. That's what got you in a hole against Alabama. If you go out there and you're in a hole of 21 to nothing at the first quarter, 28 to 7 at halftime, you're in a really, really bad spot. You're not going to be able to win this game against Texas. And so you really got to go out there and just execute those plays. I know it's something that everybody's been preaching: execution, execution, execution on offense, especially. And I think Georgia's kind of found that groove to be able to score points. I think that they can go in there and play. And Carson's shown that he's gotten confident. I feel like he's willing to rip it. Obviously, they threw the ball dang near 50 times on Saturday. They're willing to let him do it. I really am confident in the offense going into this Texas game. Like you said, the secondary for Texas hasn't really gotten better throughout the season. They haven't really played a bunch of big competition. You go play, they've played Michigan. Michigan doesn't throw the ball a lot. That's not their game style. So you haven't seen them get challenged by a team like Michigan, right? You had Oklahoma, who has a backup quarterback in, and their offense is anemic at best this entire season. So those two opponents haven't, and those are the only two good opponents they've played all season. So those two opponents haven't been able to attack that secondary in the same way that I think Georgia can with Arian Smith, Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, and Carson Beck. So I do think Georgia's going to be able to go in there and attack offensively, score enough points to win that game. The question for me is, how much can that defense respond from a performance like they just had this Saturday? Can they go out there, be more disciplined, and be in the right places? They don't have to sit there and pick the ball off 3 times to win this game. They just can't go out there and give up 70-yard touchdowns or 70-yard plays, a couple times throughout the game. If one of them happens, live through it, learn through it, and get back on and make your plays coming up. But I think Georgia, going into this game, the question for me is on that on that defensive side of the football for them. And offensively, Texas has been good, but they are, like I just said a second ago, they had Oklahoma this weekend, and, Quinn Ewers only threw for 199 yards. He didn't go out there and just light up the world. So he's not going to sit there and take the top off constantly if you don't give it to him. And I think Georgia could be in a really good position. I think, like I said earlier in the show, this is a must-win game for Georgia, and I think they know that, and I think they're going to go into it and play aggressively. I think they're going to come out there with a good strategy, offensively and defensively, and get the job done.
Yeah, I think Georgia, they can play with anybody. They can compete with anybody. I don't think there's any questions about that. I think the biggest thing going into this game is don't have one of your worst halves of the season like you did against Alabama, and don't turn the ball over 4 times. You don't do those things against Alabama, you win that football game. Don't do those things on Saturday. I like your chances of beating Texas and knocking them off and handing their first loss.
I'll go ahead and do it. I know we didn't talk about this before, but I'm going to do it anyways. My score prediction for this game is going to be Georgia 34 to, let's say, 28. I think it's a close game. It's a 1-score game, but I think Georgia wins. Maybe it's a 3-point game, but I think Georgia wins by 1 score.
And I'll say this: if you hold Steve Sarkisian's offense to 28 points, that's a win all day defensively.
Yeah.
So if Stoddard's prediction comes true and Georgia does hold Texas's offense to 28 points, guys, do not be crying about that defense. Do not complain about that defense, because that is a freaking win right there. You hold the 28 points. That is an absolute win for Georgia. I'm not going to give the score prediction yet. I don't even feel comfortable enough to give a score prediction yet. I'd like to get some more analysis, and this is something we've talked about on our show of predictions are getting pushed forward so much earlier in the week.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like you used to just wait till Friday. Everybody gives their final analysis and you get your predictions in. And now I wake up on Monday and I'm getting texted, hey, get your predictions ready for all 6 games this weekend. All right, let me figure out what I can mush up for these 6 games. So I'll give my prediction on our show like I always do. But I do think I am leaning towards a Georgia win, but still not sure. I'd like to see kind of some more things match them up together, stack the teams up, and see where I finally play out.
Yeah, well, Jay, I don't do a show Monday through Thursday,
you don't, and
4 days a week. So my one chance to get a prediction in is Sunday night right here. So I'm going to give it, and I do think, I think it's, if Georgia loses this game, I'm not saying that's something that I'm going to be surprised by, right? Like, obviously, Texas is a very good football team. We've seen some issues with Georgia on the season. I do think that this is it's a game that Kirby Smart knows the situation, and I think the team does as well. They got to go on the road. It's a tough environment. It's, going to be just like playing in Alabama kind of thing. The crowd's going to be there. You're going to have to deal with all that. And I think the reason I think Georgia's going to be okay in that game is because Georgia went into Alabama. They got behind by 28 points, and they still crawled back and were able to take a lead in that game. And then you're one generational talent play away from Ryan Williams of still being able to win that football game, right?
Absolutely.
Or take one of those turnovers away from your offense. And I don't care who you are. If you think Carson Beck is turning the ball over 3 or 4 times again in a single game, you're out of your mind. He's not going to do that. He does not do that. Now, he might have a 2 turnover game. This past weekend, we just talked about those. Those were not, in my opinion, bad plays by him. It's football, things happen kind of thing. And I'm not the biggest person to come in here and say, picks aren't on the quarterback. When you look at the stat sheet, yeah, he's got 5 interceptions on the season. He does. 3 against Alabama and 2 on Saturday. But when you can look at them and see why they happened, you go back to that Alabama and you see why 2 of those interceptions happened in that game, and you don't necessarily think he's a bad football player because of it. You go back and look at both interceptions from this past Saturday against Mississippi State. You don't think Carson Beck is a bad football player because of those 2 interceptions. It's football. Things happen at times. Things don't always go the way you want, but he is still the same guy that protects the football, doesn't turn it over. And I think if you don't go in that, stadium against Texas and turn the ball over a bunch, you're going to have the chance to win that game late in that game, and I think Georgia will be able to do it this time. So that wraps up the Texas talk on it. Well, we got a couple minutes left. Let's do it real quick and get out of here. But what do you have on the docket for Georgia? What is the roadmap for Georgia to be able to be in a national championship game, be able to have a chance to win one this year, even though things don't quite look as good as you maybe hoped this year? What would you line up for how they get there?
You get there by taking care of business the rest of the regular season. I think there's still obviously an avenue for Georgia to lose on Saturday, and you do get in the playoff. But I think at that point, if you have 2 losses, you're putting yourself at risk of the committee making a decision about you. Whereas if you went out, including the Texas game, it's a no-brainer. They're going to put you in, and there's no longer a discussion about Georgia. The only discussion is what seed are we putting them at. So I think that includes that. I also think it includes that you just got to play clean football. The silly penalties, playing a full, complete game on both sides of the football, playing complementary football, I think is the biggest thing of the defense rewarding the offense and the offense rewarding the defense for the entirety of a football game. We haven't really seen much of that from Georgia this year. And I think that, if there ever was a silver lining about Georgia struggling at this point in the season, it is that you're not in week 12 and you're going in with these questions right now. You're in week 7 technically, but you're going into the halfway midpoint of this season with these questions. So there's still time to fix it. There's still plenty of more reps for players to get and build some more confidence. But yeah, just playing clean football. I mean, you got the talent in the world. You got all the talent in the world to do this. You got all the talent in the world to win a national title. You're just not playing like a national title team just yet. So you got to get to that point. You got to start cleaning things up, and you got to start executing at a higher clip. And I think they can do it.
Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest thing is execution and just playing clean football. Anytime you go turn the ball over, or you're making, boneheaded mistakes, offensively busting plays, routes, defensively busting coverages. Anytime that kind of stuff is happening throughout the entire season, there goes your chances. This is college football. It's not the NFL where you have 17 regular season games and you can have a couple of bad games mixed in and still be fine. In college football, I guess it'll be the first year that we get to see how the 12-team playoffs situation plays out, where you can still be a 2-loss team and make it in. And while I do think that, Georgia might win this Saturday, I think they will win this Saturday. If they do have 2 losses, get to the, conference championship, maybe they play in a conference championship. At that point, if you have 2 losses prior, you get to the conference championship. I feel like you got to win that game if you were to be in that situation, because you can't be with a 3-loss situation. Now, how they would handle that as a committee, saying, well, they only had two losses. They were ranked, 8th, 9th, whatever, 10th before this game. Are they going to penalize you for being in that game versus sitting at home? I don't know. And we'll see how that plays out this year. But you put yourself in a situation where you can't have any other mistakes the rest of the season, including that SEC championship game, if you do not win on Saturday. So I think their pathway to get to a playoff, their pathway to win a national title, starts on Saturday, where you have to win, because you cannot drop this game. You got Ole Miss later, you got Tennessee later. Like I said, you still got Florida and Georgia Tech on the schedule as well, where they're going to compete against you. You can't slip up in your second game that is considered a tough game at the season, 7 games in. You can't have 2 losses at that point. That's number 1 for me. Number 2 is just find your groove offensively and defensively. Offensively, I feel like they might have found it. I feel like they've kind of got some confidence there, like we've talked about already in the show. I think they've got that rolling, and Bobo's got Carson feeling confident. He's throwing the ball around, throwing for 400 yards in 2 games so far this season. I think he'll have a couple more 350-yard games on the docket. It might take something like that on Saturday to win against Texas as well, especially against the secondary that they have. You might be able to get some shots down there. So I think that's number 1 on the offensive side. And on the defensive side, you just got to calm down. I feel like this defense is kind of rattled almost. I feel like they get, in a spot where they like start panicking. And so they get in situations where they put themselves in the wrong spots because they're almost panicked. And I feel like that calming presence on that defense, or that leadership role, hasn't quite been filled on that defensive side of the football for them yet. And I think they need somebody to really just grab the helmet of these young guys sometimes and just say, hey, you know what to do. Be where you're supposed to be. Take a deep breath and let's move on. You made a bad play on that last one. That's fine. Don't do it again. Like let's be where we're supposed to be. So I think that defense needs to find their groove moving forward to be able to actually get there. Like we said, the schedule is brutal overall. You get through Texas, though, I think Georgia will be able to win out the rest of it. This is the last one that I think is, they are the number 1 team in the country right now. This is a team that you can't sleep on. Obviously, they're going to challenge you. So you get through that game, and I think Georgia has a pretty smooth path the rest of the way. There'll still be games that'll challenge you throughout the season. They'll still probably be 1-score games, but I think Georgia will be able to win the rest of them if they can get through this one.
Yeah, Saturday is definitely the biggest one. You win Saturday, you're feeling really good about the rest of the way. Yeah,
absolutely. Do you have anything else to add on the show this weekend, Jonathan?
Nah, dude, I think I'm good. Been a minute since I've talked some Georgia football outside of a Monday through Thursday, but I was happy to do it, and I'm glad you asked me to get back on here with you.
Yeah, hopefully we can stay more consistent with it. I know next weekend I'll be on my way home from Vegas, so Sunday may or may not be able to happen on that one. But
of course you are.
The job calls. Duty calls is what they say, right?
The job.
The job.
The job.
Yeah, exactly. But as always, guys, we appreciate you. Like, subscribe, and share with your friends and family, and make sure we get these numbers up on this week. I know people don't really know when we're doing episodes anymore, so it's kind of hard for people to stay consistent. But hopefully we'll be more consistent as the season goes on. Make sure you follow us on social medias and everything like that, and we will let you know when stuff is coming up and everything. So, as always, keep it classy in the Classic City. We will see you next week or 2 weeks.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Classic City Sports. Take a second to subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends and family. Feel free to reach out to the Classic City Sports crew on Twitter with any topics you'd like discussed. You can reach out to Jeremiah at The Stodfather, to Jonathan at Dr._J Will, and make sure to follow at Classic City Pod for show updates. Check back next week for a brand new episode. In the meantime,
Two simple words which express the sentiments of the entire